Ahoy folks, trying a more informal type of video recording this time. So this locomotive you see before you is a Belle of the 80s. That is to say 1880s. This particular model is actually one of the oldest HO items that I own and possibly one of the earliest commercially available HO locomotives ever. This one was made in 1938, I believe. It was made by Mantua and has a 6 to 8 volt DC motor. Now you may notice that it's not in its original color scheme. This sort of maroon and wrought iron boiler jacket and boiler bands and all that was done by myself with a paintbrush and a lot of patience. I still haven't given this one a name or a number or anything yet. That's going to go right about here on the cab side. But what you might notice is that the tender is a Casey Jones locomotive tender. Now why is that? Well, this one did come with its original tender, but the power pickup mechanism on it I really didn't like, and it would have been too much of a pain to completely redo. So instead I found another one of these Riv Rossi Casey Jones tenders, which just happens to couple on and be wired to work with this one. And yeah, I think it actually looks quite decent. Now the project for this video is actually going to be painting this tender to match this locomotive. Now the previous owner of this locomotive painted it entirely black and had it as number 9. I like the number 9, but obviously I've kind of I've 19th centuryified it a little bit, if that makes any sense. And we're going to be going even further with it. It's going to have all kinds of frilly trim and a name of some kind. I'm not totally decided, but something equine centric, like Pegasus or Unicorn or something like that. This locomotive I've done up to sort of depict a New York Central 1893 exhibition flyer engine, and as such, it's getting very decked out. And to start with, I think on the tender, I've had an idea. So I'm keeping the number 9 on this engine, but on the Casey Jones tender, where it's 382, if we paint out the other numbers, and then just a little bit of the 8, we could use the original 8 and make it into a 9. To start with, because we're just going to be blanking off the numbers, we're going to be using this, I believe they call it Mars Black. My secret for avoiding brush strokes is that I kind of don't care. What I tend to do is I do them vertically anyways, so that will be where the rain would be sort of streaking down on the paint when it's outdoors. That, and also I tend to go in very light coats so that the streaks aren't very thick. Might have used a little bit too much paint, but I think I might just go all the way around the sides of the tender and just do some of this. I know that a lot of the Riv Rossi stuff is getting kind of rare and pricey now, so if any Riv Rossi collectors out there are watching this, I do apologize. There's going to be one less original mint Casey Jones tender out there. I completely secede to the idea that there are better ways of accomplishing this than what I'm doing here, but this is just a bit of fun. One nice thing about painting steam locomotives is that, well, for one thing, in real life they were painted oftentimes with actual brushes and things, and so touch-ups would be just, you know, grabbing a brush, finding a close enough color and patching it up. Which is part of why in the US so many steam locomotives are painted just flat black, because, well, if you need to touch up the paint for any reason, there you go. I also find that for some reason the brush strokes, when the paint's wet, the brush strokes look really, really awful, but then once it dries it's hard to notice. Again, it sort of depends on how much water there is and how thick the actual paint going on is and so on, but yeah. There we go. That's another nice thing I like about these acrylics is that you don't really have to mask things off so much. Like, for example, that handrail. If I don't want paint on it, I just sort of wipe it off while it's wet. Okay. Looking very shiny right now. Which actually, you know what, for a thing that's going to the 1893 World's Fair exhibition, that's not too bad. Because in a lot of the black and white photos we have of engines going there, the New York Central and Hudson River, they really dolled their engines up for that event. That's something else with 19th century engines that I find fun, is that we don't have very many color. We obviously we have no color photos of them. We have color illustrations of what the standard builder's paint jobs would have looked like. But beyond that point, we don't know what color they actually were in service most of the time. All we know is that they must have been colorful, judging by the albedos and things in certain pictures. But the actual specific colors are kind of a mystery. And as an art person, for one thing, I like that they're colorful because there's a lot of color theory that goes into them. But also, I kind of like that nobody can really definitively say it's wrong, you know. So here's the trick. I'm gonna switch to a smaller brush. Flip it upside down so I can see what I'm doing a little bit more clearly. Look at that. And there we go. Let that dry for a little bit. I feel like I just cheated. That's great. That was something I noticed at my visit to the Cedar Point Railroad fairly recently. Was that at least on the Judy K locomotive, the choice of purple is the same shade that I would have picked if I was painting it, and made me feel weirdly vindicated. Next thing to do will be stripes. I actually enjoy painting stripes by hand. I don't know why. I think part of it is that on a steam locomotive, as I've said before, if you need to touch something up, pretty much all you need to do is just add a little black stain. Okay, so I don't even know if it's visible on camera, but that is a pink stripe on that locomotive tender. And what it's doing is, and this might look better in natural light, it's going to make the color difference on this panel of the tender a little bit less obvious unless you're looking at it closer. Because that's something I notice on color palettes, like for example the Baldwin Book of Styles. They'll have two colors that are kind of similar, separated by a really, really, really bright color. There. Now that matches up a little more. See, if this had wall shirt gear on the outside or something like that, I wouldn't be able to do this so easily. Oh, what do you know, there's just enough slack in the rods that I can just reach in. There. There, and because they're a different color than the white walls, they kind of pop a little bit more, because the white walls are actually in silver, kind of almost what would have been aluminum paint. But then the centers are the pink in it. Oh, that's really cool. I think part of why I like using pink specifically for doing running boards and so on. Actually, I did pink on a boiler jacket once. It's because if you're really careful about how saturated it is, it just looks like white, but like just a little bit off. And I think it's because people have told me, you know, most people when it comes to painting locomotives would say, oh no, you shouldn't use pink. And I like being able to trick your brain into not quite noticing it, if that makes any sense. Okay, so that's looking a bit more interesting. Just a little bit of additional interest. I don't have a road name in mind for this engine, but if I did, half the letters would go over here, half the letters would go over here. Yeah. Now, of course, I've still got a few decals to print off, like, maybe the name going across the scroll work here, and maybe some lettering on the tender. But for the most part, I mean, I don't know. I'm pretty fond of that.